Welcome back, everybody, to the Teen Titans retrospective, going through every episode of the original Teen Titans series. So, subscribe if you don't want to miss any episodes. Let's get into it. This is a Starfire one. Here we go. This is Season 3, Episode 3, Betrothed, written by Amy Wolfram and directed by Alex Soto. The episode opens with Starfire packing up all her stuff, and we find out that she is returning to her homeworld because apparently she is getting married.
Married?
Married.
Married?
Yeah, married.
The Titans come with her in the T-ship, and we get to see Starfire's homeworld of Tamaran. That's right, this is a Starfire episode, and we get a decent amount of world building and character information about Starfire and her backstory and sort of what her deal is, which is interesting. So the Titans land their ship in what looks almost identical to the Cloud City landing pad that the Falcon lands on. They even do the same exact fake out where you meet somebody who you think might be a threat, but then they turn out to be an ally. And we meet a character named Galfor, who's this big, bulky Tamaranian guy. And we find out that he essentially raised Starfire. Beast Boy equates him to a nanny, which I guess kind of fits. And we find out that Starfire is actually a princess of Tamaran. And so the reason that she's betrothed, it's a political move. Tamaran is being invaded by this alien race, and so if she marries this, what turns out to be this big slug monster guy, she can form an alliance with this invading force and they will no longer be a threat. It's a political thing. Starfire doesn't really want to go through with it, but she feels that she has a duty to her people, and that this will help protect them and keep them safe. We also meet up with Blackfire, who is here. Of course, Starfire's sister, who we met back in Season 1. She explains that she escaped from space jail and took over the planet, basically, and is ruling as Empress. So I think because we don't see Starfire's parents in this episode, and the only kind of major authority figure we meet is this dude Galfor, who I think is interesting, but we don't get a whole lot of time with him. I think we have to assume that Starfire's parents are dead, because they're not here. And she was raised by this other dude who's maybe a butler type, maybe a servant of the royal family or whatever. And maybe they would have had him help raise her anyways. But if Blackfire is in charge, where are the parents? So I think that's interesting. It's not something that's specifically addressed, but I think that's the logical conclusion. And either way, the show likes to do this thing where they kind of avoid showing the characters' parents for the most part. We do interact with Raven's parents a little bit, but other than that, we kind of don't really see many of the characters' parents or parental figures. For some characters like Robin, who are orphans, that, makes sense, but we don't see Batman, who is, Robin's surrogate father. And a big part of that is to kind of give the character space to come into their own without their parental figures. The show is a little bit about growing up and finding your own path and stuff. It's about being a teenager. And so part of that is starting to go out on your own and starting to make your own decisions without the influence of your parents. What's interesting with Starfire is that the fact that we're going back to her homeworld is it's like if we did an episode where Robin went back to Gotham. We don't really do that with many of the other characters. And she has this actually really sweet relationship with Galfor, who seems to be kind of a surrogate father figure to her. So it's interesting to me because it's one of the only healthy relationships any of the Titans have with a parental type figure. Okay, so Robin is obviously not into the idea of Starfire marrying somebody else, but the other Titans are well, I mean, we don't really know their culture here, so who are we to question what's going on? But Robin's not convinced, and he's also also we know Blackfire is bad, so we should, all right, fine, let's look into this further. Let's investigate what Blackfire's up to, who these alien invaders are, and so on. The Titans do that. They find out that all these invading ships don't have pilots. There's actually no invading army. It's this elaborate hoax orchestrated by Blackfire, who of course turns out to be bad, and she's made a deal with this slug man to marry off her sister in exchange for this jewel thing.
They're jewels, Betty.
their jewels.
It amplifies her powers and will make her even more powerful and whatever. But when the Titans figure all this out, Blackfire throws them in jail. Briefly, we see one of the space cops that arrested Blackfire the first time. I think that's a fun little Easter egg. Eventually, they break out and they have to stop the wedding, and it's one of those scenes. They even do a shot that's, I think, supposed to be a reference to The Graduate. They get to the wedding just in time, and Starfire challenges Blackfire for the crown of Tamaran. They fight. What's kind of cool about this fight is that we see that Starfire has grown a lot in her power level since the first time that she fought Blackfire, way back in the beginning of season 1. In that fight, Starfire was kind of just barely able to like keep up with Blackfire, and she didn't even really defeat her on her own. These space cops ended up intervening. But here, Blackfire has like gained a power upgrade, and Starfire is still able to hold her own and manages to defeat her. It's a fun little power scaling kind of moment. We see that Starfire has grown in strength and abilities over the course of the series. Up to this point, she even uses her laser eyes a couple times during this fight, which she gained in that one episode with the puberty stuff. So, you know, Starfire's grown up a little bit, and so she's able to stand up to and even defeat her older, more powerful sister. So Starfire gains the crown of Tamaran, but ultimately appoints Galfor in charge because she wants to spend time with the Titans instead. And she says that she believes this is the right move and what's best for Tamaran and stuff, which makes sense. Galfor seems a lot more invested in the politics of what's going on here than Starfire does. And that's the episode, basically. We get to learn more about Starfire and her backstory and like her homeworld and stuff, but it's ultimately a very simple episode. It's a little bit disappointing, not in this episode itself, but in knowing the future of the series and the fact that this is the last appearance of Blackfire, which is kind of strange to me because she's kind of like an instantly iconic character from this show, and she only has 2 major appearances. I think they mention her once or twice after this episode, but she does not appear again. Part of this could be just that Starfire never gets her own full season arc, unlike the rest of the Titans, which is kind of disappointing. If we ever got that 6th season, I think it would be cool to give her a whole season. Because a lot of this like big space opera, intergalactic politics, very like Star Wars-y type stuff is fun and cool here. And I like that we're able to like transition fairly seamlessly from like teenage superhero stuff on Earth to like crazy high concept space opera shit within the same series, and it feels pretty seamless. But like this type of story where this Starfire and Blackfire like fighting for the crown of their homeworld feels like a bigger epic story that could have taken on a whole season, maybe more than just the one episode. I don't know. I want to see more of this world, and we don't really see much more of this world. There are some other episodes focusing on Starfire later on, but they're more relating to other characters not related to Tamaran. So it's just like, I want to know more about this stuff, and we get very little. Like, there's some kind of interesting world-building stuff. We see that the Tamaranians are kind of this, like, warrior race. Several of the characters have battle scars and stuff. Galfor I really like as a character, even though we don't get a whole lot of time with him. He's this, like, big, burly, buff guy who seems like he'd be super intimidating, but really he's, like, a big teddy bear, and he's, like, super sweet to Starfire. I like their relationship a lot. It's nice to see a healthy parental relationship in this show. But then there's other stuff where it's like all the other Tamaranians that we see have the exact same outfit as Starfire, and they all have red hair, which even that is kind of weird because like we've seen from Blackfire that some of them have darker hair. And it's like, then where are they? So they all kind of feel like more homogenized, like they're all just like copies of the same style of person. I would have liked a little more variation in appearances of some of these background characters, but I also just like would like to know more about this world and what their whole deal is and stuff. The other thing that I find interesting about Galfor, and this is related to stuff that we learn much later on in the series, but we see that Galfor speaks English, and we do make a distinction between them speaking English and Tamaranian, because when Starfire first arrives, she's speaking an alien language, we assume Tamaranian. So the thing about Tamarans is one of their abilities is that they can learn the language of another person if they make out with them. That's how Starfire first learned English, as we'll learn much later on in the series by making out with Robin. So the fact that Galfor knows English means that he at one point made out with somebody. I don't know who, but I think that's interesting. It's interesting that we get all this information about Tamaran and their culture and like what the politics of that is all like, but it also feels like they didn't think about a lot of the details of it that much. And we never return here. So, I don't know. It's a kind of fun episode, and we introduce a lot of things, but then none of these things ever come back. It's cool that they're there, but I just like want to know more. That's it. Oh, also, one other little Easter egg. We do see Silky briefly when Starfire's packing up her stuff to leave at the beginning of the episode. I like that we're getting all this information about Starfire and stuff, but at the same time, it kind of feels like a lot of her agency is kind of taken away because she's like being married off to this guy she doesn't want to marry, and then it's Robin and the Titans who eventually like help her be like, hey, turns out it's a ruse, don't marry this guy, and then she's like, okay. And she does get this cool fight with Blackfire at the end, but for most of the episode, like, she doesn't have a whole lot of agency. And like, yes, she is choosing to go through with this, which is, you know, a choice, but it feels very much like The Princess Bride, or like any number of stories that you've seen a million times where the girl is marrying the wrong person and the guy has to save her.
Can do, spilt baby doll.
So again, I like seeing more of Starfire, but it's a little bit disappointing that she loses some of her agency in this episode, especially because this episode is focused on her. So yeah, I'm glad this episode exists because we get to see a little bit more of Starfire's homeworld. We get to see Blackfire again, who's a very fun villain, but I want to know more about this stuff, and I want to see Blackfire again. We don't, and that's disappointing. Most of my faults of this episode are just the fact that we don't get more information about this stuff later on. As an episode as itself, it's pretty fun. There's some good action. There's some really fun, wacky animation. It's still a good time overall, though I think it could have been much stronger. But that's it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Once again, we're going through every episode of the original Teen Titans. So we'll see you again next week with another episode. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss that. That's it for now. Bye-bye.